The morning mist hung low over Kensington Palace as guard Thomas Mitchell began his usual patrol. He had been working at the palace for 12 years, and every stone, every corridor, every shadow was familiar to him. Thomas was a quiet man in his 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His colleagues often joked that he could spot a fly landing on the wrong flower in the palace gardens. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Thomas checked his watch. 5:30 a.m. The palace was still asleep, wrapped in the peaceful silence that comes before dawn. He walked through the grand hallways, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished marble floors. The portraits of long-dead royals seemed to watch him as he passed, their painted eyes following his movement through the dimly lit corridors. Thomas had always loved these early morning hours. There was something magical about having the entire palace to himself, knowing that behind these walls, history had been made for centuries. Kings and queens had walked these same paths, made decisions that changed the world, and lived their most private moments within these ancient stones. As he turned the corner toward the east wing, Thomas noticed something unusual. One of the tapestries that decorated the wall was slightly askew. It was a beautiful piece from the 18th century, depicting a hunting scene with nobles on horseback. Thomas frowned. The housekeeping staff was meticulous about such details. Everything in the palace had to be perfect, especially when members of the royal family were in residence. He walked over to straighten the tapestry, running his hands along its edges to smooth it back into place. As he did, his fingers caught on something unexpected, a small gap between the tapestry and the wall. Curious, Thomas lifted the heavy fabric and peered behind it. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. There was a narrow opening in the wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Thomas had worked in this palace for over a decade, had studied its blueprints during his security training, and had never seen or heard of any passage in this location. The opening was well hidden, cleverly disguised by the way the tapestry hung. Thomas pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the darkness beyond the opening. He could see rough stone walls and what appeared to be a narrow staircase leading downward. The air that drifted out was cool and slightly musty, carrying the scent of age and secrets. His training told him to report this discovery immediately, but his curiosity was stronger. Thomas was a practical man, but he was also human, and the mystery of a secret passage in one of the world's most famous palaces was too intriguing to ignore. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully squeezed through the opening. The passage was indeed narrow, built for people much smaller than modern adults. Thomas had to duck his head and turn sideways in places as he made his way down the stone steps. The walls were rough-hewn, clearly much older than the palace's renovated sections. This looked like it might date back to the original building, perhaps even earlier. As he descended, Thomas counted the steps. 20, 30, 40 steps down. The air grew cooler, and the silence deeper. His flashlight beam danced across the stone walls, revealing occasional iron brackets that might once have held torches. This wasn't just a hidden passage, it was a proper tunnel system. At the bottom of the stairs, Thomas found himself in a narrow corridor that stretched in both directions. The ceiling was low, forcing him to stoop slightly as he walked. He chose to go right, following the beam of his flashlight deeper into the mystery. The tunnel was longer than he had expected. He walked for what felt like several minutes before coming to another set of stairs, these leading upward. Thomas climbed carefully, counting again. 15 steps up brought him to what appeared to be a dead end, a solid stone wall blocking his path. But as he examined the wall more closely, Thomas realized it wasn't solid at all. There was another hidden opening, this one concealed by a heavy stone panel that could be pushed aside. With some effort, he managed to move it just enough to peek through. Thomas found himself looking into what appeared to be a storage room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old furniture, paintings wrapped in cloth, and boxes of various sizes. Dusty shafts of light filtered in from a high window, suggesting this room was at ground level or perhaps even slightly above. He pushed through the opening and emerged into the storage room, brushing dust and cobwebs from his uniform. Thomas looked around, trying to orient himself. Based on his mental map of the palace and the direction he had traveled, he estimated he was somewhere in the service areas of the building, perhaps near the kitchens or staff quarters. A door on the far side of the room stood slightly ajar. Thomas approached it cautiously and peered out into a hallway he recognized. He was indeed in the service area, not far from the main kitchens. The tunnel had taken him from the East Wing's residential area to the working heart of the palace. Thomas felt a mixture of excitement and concern. This tunnel system represented a serious security breach. If he could find it by accident, who else might know about it? How long had it been there? Who had built it and why? He made his way back through the passage, this time paying careful attention to every detail. The construction was definitely old, probably dating back several centuries. The stonework was consistent with medieval building techniques, suggesting this tunnel might have been part of the original fortifications, or perhaps a secret escape route for the royal family. When Thomas emerged back into the East Wing, he carefully repositioned the tapestry and continued his patrol. But his mind was racing with questions and possibilities. He needed to report this discovery, but he also wanted to understand more about what he had found. The rest of his shift passed slowly. Thomas tried to act normally, completing his rounds and checking in with the security office as usual. But every few minutes his eyes drifted back to that tapestry, knowing what lay hidden behind it. As the palace began to stir with the arrival of the day staff, Thomas made a decision. He would come back during his next shift and explore the tunnel more thoroughly. Perhaps there were other branches, other secrets waiting to be discovered. He owed it to the security of the palace to understand this hidden network completely before making his report. When Thomas finally went home that morning, he was exhausted but energized. He had stumbled upon something extraordinary, a piece of palace history that had been forgotten by time. As he lay in bed trying to sleep, his mind kept returning to the dark tunnel and its mysterious purpose. He didn't yet know that his discovery would soon entangle him in events far more complex and dangerous than he could imagine. The hidden tunnel was just the beginning of a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the palace and the people who lived within its walls. The next evening, Thomas returned to work with a small backpack containing additional supplies, extra batteries for his flashlight, a camera to document his findings, and a measuring tape to map the tunnel system properly. He had spent his day off researching the history of Kensington Palace, looking for any mention of secret passages or underground construction. What he found was intriguing but inconclusive. Historical records mentioned that many royal residences had hidden passages built for security purposes, allowing the royal family to escape unseen during times of danger. Some sources suggested that Kensington Palace had such features, but the details were vague and the locations unspecified. As Thomas began his patrol that evening, he felt like an explorer about to embark on a great adventure. The palace seemed different, now that he knew it held secrets beneath its elegant facade. Every shadow, every architectural detail took on new significance. He waited until well past midnight, when the palace had settled into its deepest quiet, before making his way back to the tapestry. This time, he brought a small piece of chalk to mark his route and help him navigate the tunnels more systematically. Thomas slipped behind the tapestry and into the narrow opening, his heart beating with anticipation. Tonight he would map this hidden world and uncover its secrets. He had no way of knowing that someone else was already using these forgotten passages, someone whose presence in the tunnels would change his life forever. Thomas made his way down the familiar stone steps, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. Tonight felt different from his first exploration. He was more confident now, knowing what to expect, but also more alert to the possibilities that lay hidden in the ancient tunnels beneath the palace. At the bottom of the stairs, instead of turning right toward the storage room as he had before, Thomas decided to explore the left branch of the corridor. His chalk marks on the wall would help him find his way back if the passages became too complex to navigate by memory alone. The left tunnel was similar to the right one, narrow, low-ceilinged and carved from the same rough stone, but after walking for several minutes, Thomas noticed that this passage was in better condition. The walls were cleaner, the floor more even, as if someone had been maintaining this section. His suspicion proved correct when he came across a modern battery-powered lantern sitting on a small stone ledge carved into the wall. Thomas stopped and examined it carefully. The lantern was relatively new, certainly not an antique left over from the tunnel's original use. Someone had been using these passages recently. A chill ran down Thomas's spine as the implications sank in. This wasn't just an archaeological discovery anymore. These tunnels were active, being used by someone who had no official reason to be wandering beneath the palace. His mind immediately jumped to security threats, espionage, or worse. Thomas turned off his flashlight and listened carefully to the silence around him. Was someone else down here right now? He strained his ears but heard nothing except his own breathing and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. He decided to continue forward, but more cautiously now. Every few steps, Thomas paused to listen and look around. The tunnel continued straight for what felt like a very long distance. Based on his calculations, he had to be well beyond the palace boundaries by now, perhaps running beneath the streets of London itself. After what seemed like an eternity of careful progress, Thomas saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Ahead, there was a faint glow of light. Not the harsh beam of an electric torch, but the softer, warmer light of candles or oil lamps. Thomas crept forward as quietly as possible, placing each foot carefully to avoid making any sound on the stone floor. As he got closer to the light source, he could hear voices, quiet conversation between two people. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, carved out of the living rock beneath London. It was an impressive space, with a vaulted ceiling and what appeared to be very old stonework. Several oil lamps provided illumination, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Thomas positioned himself in the darkness just outside the chamber, where he could observe without being seen. What he witnessed made his blood run cold with shock and confusion. Two figures stood in the center of the chamber, deep in conversation. One was a woman in an elegant coat and headscarf, her posture and bearing unmistakably aristocratic. Even in the dim light, Thomas recognized her immediately. It was Camilla, the queen consort herself. The other figure was a man Thomas had never seen before. He was tall and thin, wearing a long dark coat that seemed to belong to another era. His face was partially shadowed, but Thomas could see he was older, perhaps in his 60s, with sharp features and intense eyes. Thomas felt his world tilting on its axis. What was the queen consort doing in a secret tunnel beneath the palace at nearly 2 in the morning? Who was this mysterious man she was meeting? And why were they conducting their business in such a clandestine location? The conversation between the two was too quiet for Thomas to make out specific words, but their body language suggested serious, perhaps urgent discussion. The man was gesturing emphatically, while Camilla listened with obvious attention and concern. Thomas fumbled quietly for his camera, knowing he needed to document this extraordinary scene. But as he raised it to take a photograph, disaster struck. His elbow bumped against the stone wall, dislodging a small piece of loose rock that clattered to the floor with what seemed like thunderous noise in the quiet tunnel. Both figures in the chamber immediately turned toward the sound. Thomas pressed himself against the wall, hoping the darkness would conceal him, but it was too late. The mysterious man was already moving toward the tunnel entrance, a small but powerful flashlight in his hand. "Who's there?" the man called out in a voice that carried both authority and menace. "Show yourself immediately." Thomas knew he had been discovered. There was nowhere to run in the narrow tunnel, and attempting to flee would only make him look more suspicious. He took a deep breath and stepped into the light, his hands raised to show he wasn't armed. "I'm Thomas Mitchell, Palace Security," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I was conducting a routine patrol when I discovered the tunnel entrance." The man's flashlight beam was blinding, but Thomas could sense the intense scrutiny he was receiving. Behind the stranger, Camilla had pulled her headscarf more tightly around her face, though her identity was unmistakable. "A routine patrol through unmarked tunnels at 2 in the morning?" the man asked skeptically. "That's quite thorough of you, Mr. Mitchell." Thomas felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the chamber. He had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding or security clearance. Whatever was happening here involved the highest levels of the royal family, and he was completely unprepared for the situation. "I discovered the entrance by accident 2 nights ago," Thomas explained. "I was exploring to assess any security implications. I had no idea anyone else knew about these tunnels." The stranger and Camilla exchanged a look that Thomas couldn't interpret. After a long moment, the man lowered his flashlight slightly, allowing Thomas to see more clearly. "Mr. Mitchell." Camilla spoke for the first time, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm afraid you've stumbled into a very delicate situation. What you've seen here tonight must remain absolutely confidential." "Of course, Your Majesty, but I have to ask, is there any security risk to the palace? It's my job to..." There is no security risk, the mysterious man interrupted. Quite the opposite, in fact. These meetings serve to protect the royal family and the realm itself. The stranger stepped closer to Thomas, and in the better light, Thomas could see more details of his appearance. He was indeed older, but carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His clothes were expensive but understated, and there was something about his manner that suggested intelligence services or diplomatic work. What you've witnessed tonight, Mr. Mitchell, is a necessary evil, the man continued. There are threats to the royal family that cannot be addressed through normal channels. These tunnels provide a secure location for discussing matters of extreme sensitivity. Thomas felt completely out of his depth. He was a security guard, trained to watch for suspicious packages and unauthorized visitors, not to navigate the murky waters of royal intrigue and state secrets. I understand the need for security, Thomas said carefully, but shouldn't the official security services be handling this? My supervisors should be informed. No, Camilla's voice was firm. This cannot go through official channels. There are complications that require absolute discretion. The mysterious man studied Thomas for a long moment, as if evaluating his character and trustworthiness. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. Mr. Mitchell, you've served the royal family faithfully for many years, he said. Your record is exemplary. But now you face a choice that will define the rest of your career and possibly your life. Thomas felt a chill of foreboding. What kind of choice? You can walk away from here tonight and pretend this never happened, the man explained. Continue your normal duties, never speak of what you've seen, and your life will continue unchanged. Or you can become part of something larger, something vital to the security of the realm, but something that will require sacrifices and absolute loyalty. Thomas looked between the two figures before him, the Queen Consort of England and this mysterious stranger who seemed to wield considerable influence. He thought about his quiet life, his simple duties, his peaceful existence within the familiar routines of palace security. But he also thought about his oath of service, his loyalty to the crown, and his growing curiosity about the secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of his ordered world. What exactly would I be signing up for? Thomas asked. The stranger smiled for the first time, and Thomas glimpsed something both reassuring and dangerous in that expression. The protection of secrets that could destroy the monarchy if they were revealed, he said. The prevention of threats that the public can never know existed, and the knowledge that you are serving your country in ways that history books will never record. Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. In the space of a few minutes, his simple life had become impossibly complex. Whatever decision he made now would change everything. He looked at Camilla, who had been watching this exchange with obvious tension. Their eyes met, and he saw something there. Not just royal authority, but human vulnerability. She needed his help, his discretion, his loyalty in a way that went beyond his normal duties. I need to understand more, Thomas said finally. Before I can make this choice, I need to know what I'm really choosing. The mysterious man nodded approvingly. A wise response. Come, let us sit, and I will tell you a story that will help you understand the true nature of the world you've stumbled into. As the three of them settled onto stone benches that had been carved into the walls of the ancient chamber, Thomas realized that his old life was already over. Whether he chose to walk away or become part of this conspiracy, he would never again be the simple, untroubled security guard who had discovered a loose tapestry just 3 days ago. The stranger began to speak, his voice low and compelling in the flickering lamplight, and Thomas listened with growing amazement and horror to a tale of hidden enemies, secret alliances, and threats to the very foundation of the British monarchy. The mysterious man's name, Thomas learned, was Alexander Whitmore. He had served the British government in various capacities for over 40 years, most recently as head of a special intelligence unit that didn't officially exist. His unit's mission was to protect the royal family from threats so sensitive that they couldn't be handled through normal security or intelligence channels. As Alexander spoke in the flickering lamplight, Thomas began to understand the complexity of the world he had accidentally entered. There were foreign agents who had infiltrated the highest levels of British society, plotting to discredit or even harm members of the royal family. There were domestic threats from extremist groups who saw the monarchy as a symbol of everything they opposed. And there were internal palace politics that could be just as dangerous as any external enemy. 3 months ago, Alexander explained, we uncovered evidence of a plot that reaches into the very heart of the establishment. Someone with access to the highest levels of government and palace operations has been passing information to hostile foreign services. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. A spy? Inside the palace? Not just inside the palace, Camilla spoke quietly. Inside the family itself. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Thomas stared at the queen consort, unable to fully process what she was saying. A member of the royal family was working against the crown. Alexander continued the explanation. We've been tracking financial transactions, communications, and travel patterns for months. The evidence points to someone very close to the line of succession, someone who has become convinced that the monarchy must be destroyed from within. But why meet here? Thomas asked, gesturing around the ancient chamber. Why not in secure government facilities? Because, Alexander said grimly, we don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. We can't trust normal communication channels, secure facilities, or even other intelligence services. These tunnels, forgotten by history, may be the only place we can meet without being monitored. Thomas began to understand the enormous responsibility that was being placed on his shoulders. By discovering their secret meetings, he had become privy to information that could shake the foundations of the British government. What do you need from me? Thomas asked, though part of him already knew the answer. We need your eyes and ears inside the palace, Alexander explained. Your position gives you access to areas and information that we can't obtain through other means. You see the comings and goings, the private moments when people think they're unobserved. You want me to spy on the royal family? We want you to help us protect them, Camilla corrected, even from themselves, if necessary. Over the following weeks, Thomas found himself living a double life that was more complex and dangerous than anything he had ever imagined. By day, he continued his normal security duties, patrolling the palace grounds and monitoring visitors. By night, he often found himself meeting Alexander, and sometimes Camilla, in the hidden chamber beneath the palace. The tunnel system, Thomas discovered, was far more extensive than his initial exploration had revealed. There were passages that connected to other royal residences, to government buildings, and even to safe houses scattered throughout London. The network had been built over centuries, expanded and modified by successive generations who understood the need for secret routes and secure meeting places. Alexander began training Thomas in basic intelligence gathering techniques, how to observe without being noticed, how to remember conversations with perfect accuracy, how to recognize signs of deception or hidden agendas. It was fascinating and terrifying work that made Thomas see his familiar world through completely different eyes. The first major breakthrough came when Thomas overheard a phone conversation that chilled him to the bone. He was performing a routine security check in the private residential areas when he heard someone speaking in urgent, hushed tones behind a partially closed door. The voice belonged to someone Thomas recognized, someone whose presence in that private area was perfectly normal and expected. But the content of the conversation was anything but normal. The security review is scheduled for next month, the voice was saying. That will be our opportunity. All the senior protection officers will be in one location at the same time. Thomas pressed himself against the wall, straining to hear more. Yes, I understand the risks, the voice continued, but we've waited too long already. The situation is becoming unsustainable. If we don't act soon, everything will be exposed. There was a pause, presumably while the person listened to someone on the other end of the call. No, absolutely not. It has to look like an accident, something that can't be traced back to any of us. The tunnel will work perfectly. It's been forgotten for so long that no one will think to look there. Thomas felt ice-cold dread wash over him. They were talking about the same tunnels where he had been meeting Alexander and Camilla. Someone was planning to use the hidden passages for something terrible. The voice spoke again, more quietly now. The device will be small, undetectable. When the security review meeting begins, we'll have 15 minutes before anyone realizes what's happening. By then, it will be too late. Thomas realized he was listening to plans for an assassination. Someone was going to use the tunnel system to plant a bomb during a meeting of the palace's senior security staff. But who was the real target? And who was the voice that was calmly planning mass murder? As quietly as possible, Thomas moved closer to the door, hoping to identify the speaker. What he saw when he peered around the corner made his blood freeze. The person on the phone was someone he had known and trusted for years, someone whose loyalty to the royal family had never been questioned, someone who had access to the highest levels of palace security and could move through restricted areas without raising any suspicion. Thomas backed away from the door as quietly as he could, his mind racing. He had to get this information to Alexander immediately, but he also had to be careful not to reveal that he had been eavesdropping. If the conspirators suspected that their plans had been overheard, they might accelerate their timeline or simply disappear, taking their secrets with them. The next meeting in the underground chamber was the most tense Thomas had ever attended. Alexander and Camilla listened in grim silence as he reported what he had overheard. When he revealed the identity of the conspirator, Camilla's face went white. "Are you certain?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas nodded. "I know the voice well. There's no mistake." Alexander was already making notes on a small pad. "This confirms our worst fears," he said. "The conspiracy reaches to the very core of palace operations. If they're willing to eliminate the entire senior security staff, they must be planning something even larger." "What do we do?" Thomas asked. "We spring a trap," Alexander replied. "But it will be dangerous for all of us. If this goes wrong, we won't get a second chance." The plan that Alexander outlined was both brilliant and terrifying. They would allow the conspirators to proceed with their plot, but with careful modifications that would expose the entire network while preventing any actual harm. Thomas's role was crucial. He would need to secretly modify the security review meeting, ensuring that the real senior staff were safely elsewhere, while specially trained agents took their places. He would also need to monitor the tunnel system, tracking when and how the conspirators accessed the underground passages. Most dangerous of all, Thomas would need to continue acting normally around the person he had identified as the traitor, giving no sign that their cover had been blown. As the day of the planned attack approached, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical burden. If he made a mistake, if he missed a crucial detail, people could die. The monarchy itself might not survive the scandal that would follow. The morning of the security review arrived, gray and rainy, matching Thomas's mood perfectly. He had spent the previous night in the tunnels, helping Alexander's team install monitoring equipment and positioning backup agents at key points throughout the underground network. Everything depended on precise timing and perfect coordination. The conspirators had to be allowed to enter the tunnels and plant their device, but they had to be captured before they could detonate it. The evidence of their treachery had to be undeniable, but the damage to the royal family's reputation had to be minimized. As Thomas began his morning patrol, he noticed unusual activity around the palace. There were more staff members than usual, people he didn't recognize moving through areas where they didn't belong. The conspiracy was larger than they had suspected, with accomplices throughout the palace staff. At exactly 11:30 a.m., Thomas saw the person he had identified making their way toward the east wing, carrying a small briefcase that hadn't been there during previous encounters. Thomas followed at a distance, his heart pounding with nervous energy. The conspirator moved with confidence and purpose, clearly familiar with the route to the hidden tunnel entrance. They slipped behind the tapestry without hesitation and disappeared into the darkness beyond. Thomas waited exactly 2 minutes as Alexander had instructed, then followed. As he made his way down the stone steps, he could hear movement ahead of him. The conspirator was already deep in the tunnel system, heading for the chamber where the security meeting was supposedly taking place. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Alexander's team had positioned themselves throughout the tunnels, tracking the conspirators' every move. When the bomb was finally planted and the conspirator turned to leave, they found their exit blocked by armed agents. The confrontation was brief but intense. The conspirator, faced with undeniable evidence of their treachery and no possibility of escape, finally broke down and revealed the full scope of the plot. It was indeed larger than anyone had suspected, involving foreign agents, corrupt politicians, and even members of the extended royal family who had been manipulated into supporting the conspiracy. As Thomas watched the arrests taking place in the ancient chamber beneath the palace, he felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the revelations about the depth of the conspiracy would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. Alexander found Thomas standing alone in the tunnel, staring at the stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets and conspiracies. "It's over," Alexander said quietly. "The threat has been eliminated." "Is it really over?" Thomas asked. "Or will there always be another conspiracy, another threat?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment before answering. "There will always be people who want to destroy what we're protecting," he said finally. "But there will also always be people like you, willing to stand guard in the shadows and protect something larger than themselves." As they made their way back through the tunnels toward the palace above, Thomas realized that his life had been permanently changed by his accidental discovery of the hidden passage. He was no longer just a security guard. He had become a guardian of secrets, a protector of mysteries that most people would never know existed. The tapestry in the east wing hung straight and proper once again, concealing the entrance to a world of shadows and secrets, but Thomas would never again be able to look at it without remembering the night he stumbled into a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of everything he had sworn to protect. In the weeks that followed, the palace returned to its normal routines, but Thomas knew that beneath the surface, the network of tunnels remained active, serving their ancient purpose of providing secure routes for those who guarded the realm's deepest secrets. And sometimes, late at night when he was alone on patrol, Thomas would catch himself listening for the whisper of footsteps in hidden passages, knowing that somewhere in the darkness below, the work of protecting the crown continued in ways that history would never record.